Yep, got it.
Interview, take one.
Okay, let's start with Circling.
Okay, cool. So Circling is a song from my record Ledger Domain, and that record sort of had two sets of songs on it. The first half was kind of more propulsive. The second half was sort of more languorous, and Circling obviously is in that second category. I think I wrote the piano motif. I was on tour with Suzanne Vega, like in Austria, and there was a piano in the dressing room of this opera house that it had the sort of the felt, the soft pedal on it permanently, and it was really cool sounding piano. So that's where that piece of music came from. It was kicking around for a really long time, and then it finally came to fruition about 5 years later and landed on Ledger Domain. And it's a fun song to sing because it has a really interesting, intense dynamic that I can kind of dig my teeth into. Just half a room. So again, the song was written in a similar time frame to Circling. I was taking a friend, let's just say, to the Venice Biennale in 2009. We were staying in a supposedly fancy hotel, and you get out of the airplane and you jump into a boat, and the boat like takes you to a dock that takes you right into your hotel. And so we get to this really nice hotel, and we get to the room. The guy opens the door, and it's like, whoa, this super garish wallpaper, and like there's a window overlooking the canals. But I realized when I got in the room, there was like maybe half an inch between the bed and the wall. So the hotel had obviously just kind of like taken a normally proportioned room and like made two rooms out of it so that they could abuse like two foreigners for 400 euros a night. And it sort of became this metaphor for a lot of things in life where you think it's going to be really amazing, but it just kind of is what it is. Memento is a song from Daylight, and it kind of comes from a fascination that I've always had with Brazilian music, or a certain type of bossa nova music. Those harmonies have sort of snuck into a bunch of my songs, but this one sort of more overtly has that mood, and also just that sense of sort of like doomed romance that a lot of bossa nova music, it has that feeling inside the song. So Memento was like this experiment, and for me, where I was just taking a nylon string guitar and coupling it actually with like really electronic elements, Juno 106, and at the time some drum machines and stuff. So for me, that was like the beginning of me starting to use electronic elements in the context of sort of organic acoustic guitar songs, and something that I hadn't really done since I was a teenager. So it was cool to. It was the beginning of a whole new chapter of how I was writing and recording. So Such Reveries, also a song from Daylight. It's a song, the conception of it was I think I've been writing that song since I was 19 years old, when I took a trip to the west coast of Mexico, and while I was in college, and it was one of those sort of magical vacations with all kinds of crazy and fun and wonderful things happening. And after it was over, it sort of just becomes almost like a dream that never really happened. Hence, Such Reveries. So For You is also a song from Daylight. I wrote that song when I was in Bosnia, of all places, and I had a friend who was involved with the organization War Child, and they would, sort of try and help kids who were in the refugee camps. This is, obviously in the late '90s during the Balkan Wars, and so I went there and was like playing songs for these kids in Kosovo in the refugee camps, and I kind of just wanted to write a song that was very pure and sweet and good and had no ambiguity about it, just because everything else in their sort of existence at that moment was so rough. So sort of the impetus of that. Forbidden Colors, yeah. That's a song that I have completely loved since the minute I heard it when I was 16, and I had been in Europe for the summer with a friend of mine. We were kind of like backpacking around France and Spain, and I was on my way back, and I was in London for one day, and I was on King's Road, and I went to a record store, and that song was playing. And I had been a fan of Japan and David Sylvian, but I had never heard that song, Forbidden Colors, and it came on, and I was like transfixed. And then I realized it was David Sylvian right away, and then found out it was Ryuichi Sakamoto and part of the score of this movie. So I instantly bought that record, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, and yeah, it's just sort of one of the more important archetypal songs in my personal canon. And it's also an amazing movie. There's several really incredible moments in that movie that just have this amazing, mysterious, evocative feeling that that's what I want music to be about in a way. So Stripped, that's another song, from my sort of teenage years when Black Celebration came out, when Depeche Mode put that record out in 1986. Actually, it was the same trip. I was in France and I saw Depeche Mode on tour. And again, just something about that sort of synth line on top of that bass line and that chord progression is just so cool. The harmony of it is so simple and yet so powerful and unique to itself, and just again creates this sort of mysterious, sort of doomed romance feeling. And certainly did that as a kid and still does. So again, one of those really important songs in my history. Well, so when we did the shows at the Carlyle, it was October of 2017, which is when Tom Petty sadly passed away. And I had never played any of his songs before. I'm not somebody who covers a lot of songs, to be honest. Most of them are on this live album. But I thought it would be cool to just pay tribute to him. For some reason, that song was sort of the closest to my wheelhouse, for lack of a better word, just harmonically and in terms of the mood of it. And it's cool to play. And I was happy to, pay him a small tribute. So Mama Who Bore Me is from Spring Awakening. It's the first song in that show, and actually the first song I wrote for that show. And Catherine Gallagher joined me for these shows at the Carlyle, and she sang it really beautifully. And it's nice to get a break and just be able to play guitar during the set at some point. Yeah, and then Touch Me, another song from Spring Awakening. That song for me is kind of like when the show itself really takes off, and you start to realize what's happening in the show, and the tone of the show and the spirit of the show really kind of comes to life at that moment. And I think it's sort of off and running from there on out. In some ways, it's my favorite song in the show because it actually sounds the way I wanted it to sound on stage. Sometimes when you're a composer and you're working in the context of musical theater, you write a song and you have a vision for it. And by the time it hits the stage and it's performed by those actors and it's been directed and produced in the way it's been directed and produced, it's very different from your initial idea. Touch Me is one where sort of the spirit remained intact. So Afternoon is a song that is from a show called Alice by Heart, which is an adaptation of Alice in Wonderland that Stephen Sater and I wrote together with Jesse Nelson, who directed the show. Again, that's sort of my favorite piece of music, and it was one of those magical moments, sort of sitting down at the piano and figuring out the melody line, and then sort of simultaneously figuring out a harmony for that line, just sort of sitting there and like plunking it out. And when it kind of came together in my head, it was really powerful. And luckily, it sort of remained that way, and as it happens on stage, sort of the original intent is still there. So that I'm really proud of that piece of music. I think like many sort of hit songs, it was written as a little bit of an afterthought when I was making the first record. It was sort of the last song that was written, and it was written kind of quickly, and I wouldn't say it was throwaway, but it just there wasn't a lot of expectation about it. And then once it was recorded, everyone seemed to really respond to it, and then the world sort of seemed to respond to it. And that's great. I don't mean to stick my nose up at that at all, but it did kind of exist on the radio maybe more than I would have wanted it to, and I think a lot of other people feel that way too. So at a certain point you sort of want it to go away and move past it, but it stuck around. And then as I continued to write and record records, as my body of work grew and I started doing work in the theater and stuff, it became less of a double-edged sword and a cross to bear, and more of a mostly fun thing to play at shows, and even sort of make fun of in a way. I continued to play it, and people continued to enjoy it, and so I'll just try and appreciate that fact and leave it at that. So Fake Plastic Trees is really probably like the first song that I ever covered properly, and I've been covering it since my first record came out. It was kind of like the only song the only cover song I would play for a really long time. And I sort of felt like, well, because Tom York and Radiohead won't play it, I was the one who had to carry the torch. Me and a million other people who I'm sure cover it. But it was just a song that's always been really enjoyable to play, and something I could really sink my teeth into, and a sentiment that I really can get behind, of the kind of inauthenticity of the world that we live in, and sort of railing against that. That always felt really satisfying to play in shows. This Is Not an Exit is a song from American Psycho, which we did at the Almeida Theatre in London in 2013 and did it on Broadway in 2016. The Almeida production was sort of more well-received than the Broadway production, but it's a really cool show. I'm very proud of it. And that's sort of the final song in the show. It's kind of Patrick Bateman's swan song. Again, it was kind of because a lot of that score is very electronic and sort of dance music of the late 80s and early 90s stylistically. That was just sort of a moment where things could get a little more languorous and emotional, and so again, it's just a song that I really enjoy performing. So there's a song I wrote kind of for my grandparents, my mother's parents, who I spent a lot of time with when I was really young. My mom was, a single working mother, and they were both incredibly kind of supportive of my musical endeavors, and they, were really important part of my life. So when my grandfather passed away in 2011, I just sort of I remember going out on a dock on a tributary in South Carolina where I sort of grew up, and just was thinking about him, and this sort of piece of poetry, for lack of a better word, just kind of came to me, thinking about my grandfather and his relationship with his wife, my grandmother. So it was, again, just an opportunity to write a song that's kind of has nothing to do with pop music whatsoever, and just sort of is a communication to these people, who are on the other side. Normally when you're on tour, you're sort of going from venue to venue and playing one or maybe two shows, at any given venue that you play at. With the Carlyle, it's kind of like a residency, and I was there for a week, and there were 6 or 7 shows. And so I thought, well, we should record all of the shows, and then that way we'll have choices in terms of you'll have 3 or 4 versions of a given song that hopefully sounded really good. There's something about playing a venue where on the one hand you have fans who are coming to see you, specifically to see you play, but that also it is kind of like the lounge in a hotel. So there are just people who are staying at the hotel who end up coming down to see you. And there's something sort of random about that, and casual is not the right word, but it's just there's a sort of a chance aspect to it that I find really interesting. And in some ways, like you're just the entertainment there for the night, and I there's a kind of humility about that I like. Night to night, there were different sets of people in the audience, and certain nights there were definitely more people who were, I guess, fans, for lack of a better word, and certain nights they were just people who happened to be at the hotel and sort of wandered into the show. And so, that, again, it makes for a really interesting energy, because a lot of times, as an artist who's making fairly intimate music, you sort of expect a certain amount of kind of etiquette between yourself and the audience, where they're kind of paying attention and listening to what you're doing. And sometimes at the Carlyle, like, that wasn't happening at all. So it was kind of, it was interesting and sometimes frustrating, but not in a bad way, to kind of like try and actually get people's attention. And it felt like playing shows, when I was 26 again.